name is Rick Thompson. I used to work here. It's been about 7 weeks since I've ever preached here because this summer I have tended to some other duties lead pastors tend to, and we're very excited to roll these things out in the coming weeks as we go forward into life groups, into our worship ministry. That's going to be some really neat things happening, some new care ministries that are taking place, and all of us will have a part and be a part of that. But before I get into the message this morning, I just want to say thank you to this amazing staff that ministered this summer, who ran leadership, not just the paid staff, but you who are volunteers in ministries. The kids, teachers right now over there every Sunday. Some of you are on the rotation to go over there month on, month off. This has been an incredible summer for me to know that I can step back and take care of some other things knowing that it's going to go well. And nowhere am I more grateful than for my assistant pastor, Levi Lowry, who has done a fantastic job preaching over these last few weeks on the I am statements of Jesus. Thank you. We have got a great relationship. I love this guy, and I know he's got my back, and I've got his, and we love each other's families. So this has just been a lot of fun for us to be on this journey together. I'm looking forward to this fall now with Kevin to be a part of the team and everybody else that's a part of this. It feels strange, however, to bring the last message of a series that somebody else has preached all the other messages, and here I'm going to finish it. So I know what you're thinking. This better be good. But we want Levi back. Well, here's the deal. We have spent this past year, focusing on the life of Jesus because we sensed early on that God the Father was telling us, focus on my son, Jesus. He's my beloved son. I sent him to you. I sent him to rescue you, to guide you, to lead you. He is the one who is worthy of all praise, full on devotion. All your glory goes to my son because I feel that way about my son, and I want you to as well. There's a lot that's wrapped up in that, and so we have been unpacking that as we've gone on this summer. Over the past 6 weeks, we have zeroed in on the rich statements Jesus made when he, speaking in the very voice of the one who spoke to Moses from a burning bush, said, I am. That is who you should tell them is sending you, Moses. That is who is standing here with you. And this is Jesus. I am is my name. I am who I am. I will be who I will be. I will be who you need me to be because I know and anticipate your needs ahead of time. You don't know what I know, but I am going to be there for you. So Jesus makes these outrageous claims to be the I am identified with the God of Israel, the creator, the savior, the redeemer, the sustainer, the judge of all the earth. He says, here I am in the flesh. And in this last I am statement Jesus makes, he takes on the most formidable enemy of them all, the one each and every one of us has to contend with. He takes on death itself. I absolutely love sharing this claim at funerals. Now, don't get me wrong, I do not like funerals, and neither do you. Nobody likes funerals. But here's what I love about being in a gathering where somebody has just lost somebody, and they're not going to be in their life, their day-to-day life any longer. This is particularly difficult when it was a young person or someone who left earth by their own hand. When anybody leaves suddenly, and all of a sudden the shock and the jolt comes, I take supreme joy and confidence to remind everyone gathered that death does not have the last word. God reserves that for himself. You and I did not get to choose the way this world operates when we were born into it, nor the God that we have. But we have a God who's gone before and who's made a way to take care of even death. That's what we're going to learn about this morning with this last statement. And so the question I ask is, where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Savior, Jesus Christ. So let's hear the story. I want to tell you the story that this statement comes up, and then we'll take a look at the scriptures. And then I'm going to share some direct insights that I've gleaned from Pastor Rob Fuquay. He wrote a book called The God We Can Know, exploring the I am statements of Jesus, and it's helped us as a resource. But I'm going to share some direct things that he said, because he says them better than I do. But I am going to love sharing it with you. So here's the story that comes out of John chapter 11. If you have your Bible, you can turn there. Otherwise, listen as it is relayed to us by John. There was a man named Lazarus. He was from Bethany. He had a sister named Mary and a sister named Martha. This was the same Mary who poured out oil on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her tears. Well, he was in Bethany and he took sick. And so his sisters sent for Jesus. He was in another part of the country teaching. And the messengers came and they said, Lord, the one that you love, Lazarus, is sick and has need of you. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. It's a funny thing to say if you know the rest of the story, which we'll get to. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Yet, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed back 2 more days. Then he said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. Oh, but Jesus, they wanted to stone you the last time we were in Jerusalem. You want to go back there? And Jesus says, it's not nighttime. It's not darkness. We're not stumbling and groping about in the dark. This is the time to get work done, and we have a limited time to go there. And so after he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. I am going to go to wake him up. Now that's beautiful, again, if you know where this is going. Because before it takes place, Jesus has already determined what he is going to do. He's already answered the sister's prayer, even though it's going to go through the valley of the shadow of death first. Well, if he's asleep, his disciples said, we don't need to be there to wake him up. They've got people that can wake him up. He'll recover. It'll be fine. And so Jesus, looking at a deft group that are following him, says pretty bluntly, Lazarus is dead. And I'm happy, I'm glad for your sake that I was not there, so that you might believe. Let's go. So then Thomas, the twin, he says to him, well, let's go. He says to the rest of the disciples, let's also go that we may die with him. He seems pretty resolved to do this. Now, on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been placed in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Mary and Martha to comfort them in the loss of their brother. They had, in that culture, in that time, you would say maybe professional mourners. Hey, so-and-so has just lost somebody. We may or may not know them, but they are going to need us. Let's go be with them and help them process through this. And so you had quite the commotion going on when he arrived. Now, let's pick up in verse 20, and I do have this one up on the screen. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Wow. This story is not about Lazarus. In fact, we know very little about Lazarus. It doesn't convey too much about him other than he was sick and he died and Jesus loved him. What this story focuses on are these sisters, Martha and Mary. This story is for those who have to live with death. In 1993, I was in my first year of marriage. I was living in Wilmore, Kentucky. I was living in Lexington, but I would drive 20 miles south to Wilmore for grad school. I was in seminary to become a pastor. In the very first year of my marriage, first or second month of being in school, I was sitting in Wilmore doing some studying, and my wife, who was a full-time nurse up in Lexington, she'd been home at this point during the day. She called me, and she said, your mom called. Your dad has had a massive heart attack. You need to come home right now. So I just jumped in the car and just sped up there as fast as I could get there. And when I walked into the apartment, Laura was just in tears. She was crying because she had gotten another phone call. And she said, your dad didn't make it. And that just hit me like I didn't know what to do with that. In fact, we got in the car and we drove the 88 miles between Lexington and Fort Thomas, Kentucky in 1 hour. And I don't think I said a word the whole time. I didn't know how to handle that. My dad was 51. I remember a few years later at the birth of my son Joshua, who is now 16. It was in 2001. My best friend, one of my best friends in my life for 16 years is Robert Hopper. He was my roommate in college. And Robert, in his very first year of marriage too, 9 months into it, came back from Ecuador, a mission trip for a week, and he was complaining of stomach pain. 3 months later, he died of cancer. Apparently it had been there, nobody knew about it, but it was too far gone. He was 34 years old. You have lost someone in your life, haven't you? Somebody's coming to mind. And if you haven't, just wait, you will. We all have to live with death. Rob Fuquay in his book tells a similar story of losing a friend who was only 24. And this person he looked up to him. He was younger, Rob was. And he looked up to this guy, and he died trying to save someone in the water. And he had a massive heart attack underwater. It was a unique situation that nobody knew about. But he died at 24. And Rob says these words, "Some months after his funeral, I pulled up beside the cemetery. I stood at his grave and just to ask God, why? Why weren't you there, Lord? Why does such a good person who was devoting his life to helping others leave this world so early?" And then Rob reflects for us, "I was learning to live with death." His question is not that different from Martha's when Jesus finally showed up. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Have you ever spoken those words to God? God, if you had listened, if you had shown up, things would be different. My mom would still be around. This accident wouldn't have happened. I'd still be working at my job. God, if you had just been here, this injustice wouldn't have occurred. The attack wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have been cancer. There's no end to the reasons for saying, "Lord, if you had been here." But this story is given to us to remind us it is for those of us who have to live with death. And that's every one of us. So Jesus replied to Martha, we keep reading in the story, "Your brother will rise again." Martha says, "Yes, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Now, before I go any further, let me ask the question, where does Martha get the idea of resurrection at the last day? What's that all about? Well, this might surprise you, but the idea of resurrection didn't originate with Jesus. This was an established understanding of the people of God, the Jewish people, as passed down in their scriptures. Now, to be sure, there were only vague statements here and there that seemed to hint at the life after life, because God was always interested in meeting his people in life, here in this world. But we have those verses here and there in the Hebrew scriptures about life after this life. But the concept became a belief with the writings of Daniel. In the book of Daniel, chapter 12, he talks about a time that's coming on his people that's going to be like no other time. It's going to be a tough, trying time. And then he says this in Daniel 12:1, "But at that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book." Kind of a book of life of those whose names are recorded who are in a relationship with God. "Many of those, multitudes of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life and some to shame and everlasting contempt." This was the belief that came down generation after generation to Jesus' day. The Pharisees captured this the most and understood the resurrection that was coming. That when a person dies, it's not that they cease to exist. No, they fall asleep, as it were. The body dies and it is buried in the dust of the earth, and in the future, that's something that the Bible calls the great day, or the day of the Lord, when God comes back to make all wrongs right. When he comes back to judge and to reward, they rise back from the grave to be rewarded eternally on the one hand, or to be punished with eternal shame on the other hand. Martha was operating with this in mind when Jesus told her, "Your brother will rise again." And she said, yes, I know. I know the Sunday school answers that I've been taught. I know what I'm supposed to know up here, but do you hear what she's really saying there? But that doesn't do me much good right now, does it? I'm hurting now. Do you have any word? Do you have any comfort for me in my pain right now? You hear that in her voice. What we believe about the afterlife, even what's been taught to us in the scriptures, what the Jews handed down to us of this future resurrection that's coming, all of this, from all practical purposes, it's just that. It's a belief. It's a concept, an idea, not a reality. Now, don't misunderstand me. Is it real? Of course it's real. That's truth. That's the way it's going to happen. But what I'm saying is, when we're going through, all of that means nothing, does it? right now my brother's been taken from me. And I cried out to God, and you didn't prevent it from happening. I need something right now, Jesus. It's like believing something good will come of this out in the future, but between now and then, we just have to gut it out. So Martha says, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day, but that's not much good right now. And precisely here, Jesus drops the hammer. I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Jesus is the man who dares claim that everything written in God's word is summed up in him. That everything God reveals about himself is fully realized in the one who is standing before you, standing with you. That day of the Lord that's coming, when God comes to right all wrongs, to justify the innocent, to pardon the penitent, to reward the righteous, that's me, Jesus says. That day when all who sleep in the dust of the earth rise, that will be happening by my power. To raise the dead to life again. Billions and billions of people have lived and then died throughout history. I am the one who does this. And I am standing right before you, Martha. Then Jesus asked the most important question of all. Do you believe this? So church, what do you believe? More importantly, who do you believe? This is a trust issue at heart. Life, death, resurrection, eternity. Do you trust me with your life, Jesus asks. Do you trust me with your death? Do you trust me with your eternal destiny? Now let's look at this conversation again, the words that Jesus uses, because there's a word that keeps popping up in his dialogue with Martha, and it's not resurrection. It's not life. The word that pops up most frequently is the word believe. Look at this again on the screen. Because the word in the original language, to believe, can also be translated trust. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, there's the number one. Even though they die, they will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me, there's the second time, will never die. Do you believe this? He says thirdly. She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe. Now let's read it again, substituting the word trust for the word believe. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who trust in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and trusts in me will never die. Do you trust this? Do you trust this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I trust. Does that change anything for you in the way that it is read? Because there's a difference between believing in something and trusting in it. We truly believe someone when we are able to put our trust fully in that person. Karl Barth was a theologian back in the 20th century. He's a Swiss Reformed theologian. And even though he was very heady and helped us understand some of the truths, he had a personal faith. And he likened his relationship with God, to a man who had a job ringing the bell in the center of the village. One day the man was climbing the circular staircase inside when he got towards the top and lost his balance a little bit. And reaching out for the handrail, he found the rope that hung to the bell above, and he grabbed it. And as he pulled down on it, he heard bong. And this metaphor became a powerful image for the way Barth understood his relationship with God. It was in those times of desperation when he felt there was nowhere else to turn that he discovered the sureness of God's presence. You see, the great goal of the spiritual life is not only to believe in God, but to believe God. You trust God, trust also in me, Jesus would say to his disciples. It is a trust issue. So Jesus told the grieving Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. He doesn't just restore, he doesn't just resuscitate and give back what was. Some of us want a boyfriend back. Some of us want our spouse back. Some of us want that job back. But he has so much more in mind because we have limited vision on what can be. And he's already orchestrated before it happens what he's going to do when he raises us from our sleep. So let's hear the rest of the story. They go and they get Mary. Martha says, Mary, the teacher is here. He wants to see you. And so Mary comes out, and what she comes out of is a group that is all crying. Everybody is just weeping. They're at the end of their, wits' end here, but their hearts are just hurting because Lazarus is dead. And Jesus sees all of that. Mary comes to him and she says, Lord, had you been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And so he says, he asks the question, well, where have they laid the body? And so they said, come and see. And Jesus wept. The Son of God, who knew that he was going to raise the dead back to life in that moment, when everybody was hurting, he cried like a little baby. It was like he just broke down and said, this is not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to deal with this. We were not intended for anybody to die. We were intended for life. And so they go to the place where he had been, behind a stone. They put the body into a cave and roll this rock in front of it. And so he came there and he said, where has the body been? Take the stone away. Martha said, Lord, by now there'll be a stench. I mean, it's been 4 days. He's dead. He's gone. Let it go. Give us a word to help us to make it through here. But this is crazy talk. And Jesus said, Martha, did I not tell you that if you believe, if you trust, you would see the glory of God? And then he says this prayer. I don't know if he went down on his knees or he just stood there, but he cried out, Father in heaven, I am so grateful that you hear me as I pray. I know that you hear me. You always hear me, but I'm saying this for their sake, that they would see that you are going to be glorified through your Son. And then with that, he gets done, and he yells at the top of his lungs at the opened tomb, Lazarus, come out. I don't know what you're thinking if you're in the audience there that day. This is crazy what's going on. But then you look up and you see a guy almost like a mummy because the grave clothes, the white was over his face and his body. He comes out bound head to foot. And then Jesus says, cut those grave clothes off of him and let him go. Here is Jesus standing in the line of not only the prophets, but Moses, who heard, who should I tell them is sending me if they ask? I am who I am. That is who you tell them. And then Moses took that and he goes to Pharaoh. And what did Moses say to Pharaoh? Say it with me. Let my people go. Jesus says to Lazarus, let him go. This is a powerful account of who Jesus is claiming to be. Now, let me say this before we go any further and finish this up. This was not, technically speaking, a full-on resurrection. This was more a resuscitation, bringing him back to the land of the living. But Lazarus would die again, wouldn't he? He would die again, and his sisters would relive the loss a second time. But this time, when that day came, they would be able to face it not only with a belief, but with trust. That the great I am is here, the one who is resurrection and life. Death takes away. Death forever changes things. That's what death does. But there is something death cannot do. Death cannot bring anything new. Death cannot create. Death cannot do a new thing and give a future. Only the great I am can do that. Let me close with this story. Pastor Fuqua, he's a pastor up in Indianapolis at a Methodist church, St. Luke's United Methodist. And he tells this story. He said, I went back to the town where I used to pastor, and I was giving a conference. I was teaching. After the conference, this woman approached me. She had attended the church that I pastored years before. And how she began attending that church was under unusual circumstances because she started attending the church at the time of a reversal of her own planned suicide. She had sat home with a pistol because of a failed marriage and because she had a gambling addiction and she had squandered all her resources. She had run out of hope altogether. And as she penned a message explaining to everybody why she was making the decision to end it all, she heard a voice say, what are you thinking? You don't want to die. So she remembered immediately that her niece had invited her to go to church. Her niece, who was younger, noticed that the joy in her aunt's eyes had faded. And so she said to herself, I can't do this. until I honor my niece's request. And looking back on it, she says, that was weird. I don't know where that thought came from, but it was there. And so that Sunday, they went to church together. And she sat in the balcony, the very last pew, as far away from the front as she possibly could get. There was a person on the praise team who recognized her, and after the service sought her out and remembered that she has a singing voice. And so he invited her to join the praise team. She refused, but she did come back to church the next week. This week, sitting in the second last pew in the balcony. Week after week, she would come and sit one pew closer, making her way down to the main floor and closer and closer. And during those weeks, something happened. It was like an unexplainable peace descended upon her. She had met the one who is resurrection and life. And she said, I don't want to die. I want to live. When Pastor Fuqua tells his story, he says, she approached me at the conference. That's the woman I'm telling you about. She was there to flash a ring in my face, a beautiful gem, because she had met and fallen in love with a gentleman. They were engaged to be married. And then these are the words that Pastor Fuqua reflects upon. You could say her old life did end. It had to. Her life, as she knew it, had to end in order for the new one to emerge. She couldn't see it. She couldn't even believe it. She just came to a point where she trusted the one who could. Some of you know what I'm talking about. You have suffered the end of your old life, and God has given you a new life, and that's your story. That's your testimony. There was something horrendous you had to come through, and you came to an end. But now you look back and you say, but look what God has brought out of the ashes. Some of you are still grieving the end of the old. Something that you know that has to happen, but you don't know that you can do it, and you could do without that thing. When you need to trust Jesus for the new thing that he is wanting to do in you. Can you place your trust in him? Will you place your trust in a person, not a set of doctrines to believe, the right stuff, or go to a church that's doing the right things and all of that? But no, can you place your trust in a personal God who sent his son Jesus for you? And on another level from this story, a far more fundamental level for all of us, I wonder who is grieving the death of a loved one, a husband, a wife, a mother, a father, a child, a friend. And you are grieving not something you had to die to, but you are grieving the loss of a very special person. Let Martha remind you that Jesus is standing with you, the one who says, I am resurrection and I am life. It is not just in the distant future. Sure, we'll get there. But right now, I want to be in your life. I want to bring new life, resurrection life to you. Do you believe him? Do you trust him? He demonstrated with Lazarus his power over death. He's going to do it again. He will. And so as we come to the end of this series on the I am statements of Jesus, let me say yet again who we are presented with. The one who is worthy of all of our glory, all of our praise. The more we know the one who said, I am the bread of life, the greater satisfaction and joy, contentment we will have in our lives. The more we know the one who said, I am the good shepherd, the greater our security and our confidence. The more we know the one who said, I am the light of the world, the more we experience God's guidance and direction, his purpose for living. The more we know the one who said, I am the true vine, the more we are connected to God's power, Holy Spirit power. The more we know the one who said, I am the way and the truth and the life, the more we walk a pattern for living that gives peace and hope. And the more we know the one who said, I am the resurrection and the life, the more we discover God's possibilities for living. So as we close this message, I want to give you an opportunity, if you don't trust Jesus, but you want to be able to do so. So let's just go to the Lord together in prayer here as we close.